defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced as follows. Count 1, first-degree murder of Christine Melton. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death.
The jury announced their decision by a vote of 9-3. Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death. That morning the courtroom held a colder atmosphere than anyone could remember. It had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The chill came from an absolute, suffocating silence, the kind that drops over a room when shock has stripped every person of speech. A silence without peace. A silence that felt exactly like fear itself, drawing in a long-held breath and refusing to let it go. The defendant remained perfectly motionless in his chair. Hands rested calmly in his lap. His face showed nothing at all. Beneath his right eye a swastika had been tattooed in stark black ink. Above his brow the word glory, curved in thick, deliberate letters. His eyes scarcely moved. They had no need to move. Every person in that space could feel the weight of his gaze pressing against them like physical pressure. On the opposite side of the aisle sat an older man. His body looked tired, worn down by years and strain, yet he kept his back rigidly straight through sheer force of will. He did not blink once while the judge began to speak the final words. His lips formed a thin, sealed line. His fingers were laced together so tightly the knuckles turned white, as though he were physically restraining something violent inside himself. What filled his eyes was not grief. It was something far sharper, far colder. The two men shared identical eyes. One had raised the other from the time he was small. The gavel struck wood with a sharp crack. The sentence was delivered, not a term of years, not life imprisonment, but death. The man in the defendant's chair gave no visible reaction. He did not beg. He shed no tears. No emotion crossed his features at all. Only his lips moved. The motion was so slight it could easily have been missed. Only a single person in the room heard the whisper that escaped. And for one frozen moment even the judge hesitated, because whatever Wade Wilson murmured in that quiet breath sent a visible ripple of ice through the entire courtroom. The formal sentence of death would be remembered by everyone present. Far fewer would carry away the private, hidden utterance he left hanging in the air. The utterance that caused his own father to make a solemn promise. He would be present in the execution chamber when the time came. Not to offer a final goodbye. To stand there and watch every second of it unfold. Before the world knew him as Wade Wilson, his name had been Anthony. He came into existence without ceremony or fanfare. Two frightened teenagers, still children themselves, brought him into the world and soon understood they were far too young and far too scared to raise him properly. They made an excruciating decision, one that might have been the wisest path available. They chose to place him for adoption, hoping another family could provide the safety, the affection, and the stable future they knew they could not give. Steve and Candace Wilson had been waiting and praying for such a child. They were kind, church-going people with gentle hearts. They already had 2 daughters and had quietly longed for a son. The first time they held Anthony in their arms they believed their prayers had finally been answered in full. They gave him their last name and a fresh first name to mark the new beginning. He grew into exactly the kind of boy who caused people to smile without thinking. Large, bright, endlessly curious eyes. Small hands always reaching to explore. A constant stream of questions about everything around him. He loved dogs of every size, the rush of wind while riding his bike as fast as he could pedal, and the warm smell of pancakes filling the house on lazy Sunday mornings. He was intelligent, not in a prodigy way but noticeably sharp and quick to learn. His report cards came home strong year after year. He was naturally athletic and moved with easy grace on any field or court. Laughter came to him without effort. A neat row of trophies lined the shelf in his bedroom. Small golden figures capturing boys forever frozen in mid-kick, mid-throw, mid-stride across finish lines. Posters of roaring race cars and powerful superheroes covered nearly every inch of wall space. On the nightstand beside his bed sat a Bible with his name embossed in gold lettering on the cover. Every Sunday morning the Wilson family took their usual place in the same church pew. Steve wearing a pressed dark suit, Candace in a soft pale blue dress. The boy settled comfortably between them. Together they sang the hymns in quiet harmony, their faces lifted toward the soft glow of the ceiling fixtures as though those lights were a private sky full of stars. Neighbors always described him as exceptionally polite. Teachers spoke of real promise and bright potential. His parents privately called him their greatest blessing. For the first 11 years of his life Wade was everything any family could possibly hope a son would be. His adoptive sisters adored him completely. Classmates competed to invite him to every birthday party, every weekend gathering. A gentle, natural glow seemed to surround him, the kind of effortless light most children lose long before they reach their teens. But even the brightest childhoods can hide gathering shadows in their corners. And even the most radiant boys can begin to flicker and fade. Around his 13th birthday, the first subtle changes appeared without warning or explanation. New trophies stopped arriving on the shelf. His bedroom door began staying closed for hours at a time. The blinds, which had always been left open to welcome sunshine, were now pulled tightly shut every single day and never raised again. At night he started moving from window to window, peering out into the dark, whispering that people were watching the house, that something unseen moved among the boxes and tools in the garage. His parents laughed softly at first, gently reassuring him it was only imagination running wild. Wade did not smile back. The boy who once knelt beside his bed to say quiet prayers now sat in the dark muttering words no one else could hear. Love still filled every room of that home. Love had simply stopped being enough to hold back whatever was beginning to rise inside him. He was only 11 years old when he spoke the words that stopped his mother cold. "I think I'm losing my mind." She paused, certain it was nothing more than a dramatic line he had picked up from television, the kind of exaggeration boys sometimes use when they are tired, frustrated, or confused. But Wade was not joking or exaggerating. His voice came out low and completely flat. His eyes opened very wide, not in terror but in the focused stare of someone watching something no one else in the room could see. That same night he moved through the house and closed every single blind again. By the time he turned 12 he refused to step even 1 foot inside the garage. He insisted something was waiting there in the shadows. His father flipped on the overhead light to prove him wrong. Only ordinary storage boxes, garden tools, and the soft mechanical hum of the water heater greeted them. Wade stared straight into the darkest corner behind the lawnmower and refused to blink or look away. His grades began dropping sharply. Sleep became something he no longer seemed capable of achieving. The boy who once raced across the backyard in soccer cleats now walked slowly through the hallways of his own house as though something invisible followed close at his heels. Sometimes he would stop speaking mid-sentence, head snapping around sharply as though a voice had whispered directly into his ear. Nothing was ever there when he looked. Then the injuries started accumulating at an alarming rate. Sprains and strains from sports. Bruises from fights. 2 separate car accidents before he was even old enough to apply for a learner's permit. Multiple concussions before his 18th birthday. 3 documented times he lost consciousness completely. One incident was so severe his mother sat on the kitchen floor holding him, tears streaming down her face while she pressed bags of ice against his swollen head. Doctors stitched wounds and prescribed rest. Coaches told him to take it easy. But inside his skull the damage had already spread far beyond what anyone could see from the outside. Years later a neurologist would examine detailed brain scans and point to the dark, irregular smudges that lit up across key regions. The frontal lobe, where impulse control and reasoned decision-making reside, was visibly scarred. The amygdala, the structure responsible for processing and regulating fear, was damaged in ways that could not be repaired. Both areas compromised. A perfect, tragic storm waiting to break. Most people never fully understand this part. Brain damage does not automatically create evil. It does not manufacture murderers out of thin air. What severe injury can do, however, is destroy the internal mechanisms that allow most human beings to pause, reconsider, and stop themselves before crossing irreversible lines. In Wade's case those mechanisms were gone. Rage ignited in an instant. Calming down became impossible. Actions flew ahead of any thought. Thrills called louder than consequences. Things, and later people, broke beneath his hands. Once the violence began flowing outward he could no longer locate any switch to turn it off. It was no longer simply a mind beginning to slip. It was his remaining capacity for humanity itself quietly dissolving. By 16 the bright, promising boy everyone had known was effectively gone. Cars started disappearing under his control. Homes were entered while families slept unaware. Lies rolled off his tongue with practiced ease, often accompanied by a small, disarming smile. He saw no reason to hide his behavior anymore. By the age of 25 simple robbery no longer held any appeal. He had progressed to hunting living targets. Very few killers wake up one random morning and suddenly decide to take human life. The descent is almost always gradual, incremental, patient. One violation carefully stacked upon another. One warning sign after another quietly explained away or ignored. One well-meaning conversation that ends with the phrase, "He's just troubled," repeated until the day arrives when someone stops breathing. Wade Wilson's fall was never sudden or dramatic. It resembled a long, dimly lit staircase. And nearly everyone who had once cared about him stood by and watched him take each deliberate step downward. He was 16 the first time police placed him under arrest for stealing a car. Many called it nothing more than a joyride, typical teenage foolishness. The charges ultimately did not hold. A year later came a burglary charge. The family had been away from home. He entered the residence, removed electronics, pieces of jewelry, and a shotgun that had been hidden under the bed. When investigators asked why he took the firearm, he answered without hesitation, "It looked cool." By 18, assault had been added to his growing record, a street fight in which he insisted he had acted in self-defense. The injuries remained minor. He walked free once again. Then came felony weapons charges, 2 stolen handguns discovered inside the trunk of a friend's car. When questioned about them, he gave a casual shrug and said they simply belonged there. Those earlier warnings never stuck. Cases dragged out, cooled off, dissolved, no solid convictions. That was the pattern. Crime piled on crime, falsehood on falsehood, indictment on indictment. Consequences always slipped away. People started whispering he was wild, volatile, hopeless. Still, almost no one saw true violence in him. Not really. Not until 2015. Police hauled him in for kidnapping plus sexual battery. A woman had been trapped for hours inside a padlocked trailer. She named Wade as one of the men involved, but terror silenced her. She fled the state rather than face court. Charges crumbled. Another warning ignored. Another escape route left wide. Then 2018 arrived and the mask finally cracked. Wade Wilson took a $20,000 contract to murder someone. This was documented. He said yes. He accepted the payment. He began plotting. He sat under active probation. Monitoring should have caught him. Instead, he remained free. 8 months later, 2 women were gone forever. Looking backward, the progression feels brutally obvious. Specialists now label it the violence escalation. Minor property offenses, weapons possession, sexual assaults, contract killing. Each rung climbed makes the next one more lethal. The cruelest truth? He wasn't tumbling downward. He was steadily ascending. Monday night, Fort Myers, Florida. Buddha Live hummed with ordinary life. No premonition hung in the air. Bass throbbed from speakers. Ice clinked in glasses. Laughter rolled in easy waves. Bodies swayed, drinks flowed, conversations sparkled without suspicion. Christine Melton glowed under the lights, hair loose, 35, self-possessed, warm. She'd come with her co-worker and close friend Stephanie Sailors. They were known faces here. Bartenders smiled when they walked in. Neither woman hunted drama or danger. Just a relaxed night, music, movement, connection. Then Wade Wilson stepped through the door. No fanfare. No cold draft. No glaring red flags. Just a man. He didn't snarl or twitch. Clean-shaven. Calm voice. He ordered drinks, tossed light jokes, noticed people's shoes, paid compliments. He moved to the beat. He smiled easily. He actually listened. He made Christine laugh out loud. Nothing feral showed. He was smooth. Approachable. Magnetic. He melted into the crowd. Dangerous men rarely wear neon signs. They arrive wrapped in confidence, humor, attentiveness, exactly when guards are lowest. Closing time came. Christine, Stephanie, and Wade walked out together. They drifted to a second, quieter spot. More drinks. More laughter. Casual stories. Nothing felt off. Stephanie remembered Christine seeming genuinely happy. She even said it aloud. Late that night, Christine sent one final text to a friend. It closed with a little smiley face emoji. The evening still felt bright. By morning, Christine Melton was dead. She had fallen asleep in the safety of her own bed, but the man she'd laughed with, danced with, kissed goodnight had stayed awake. He waited until her breathing deepened. Then he struck. That last text ended in a smiley. Her phone gave one soft buzz on the nightstand. The room had gone completely still. No music, no voices, only heavy quiet. She lay relaxed, eyelids heavy from the good night. A small lamp spilled warm gold across part of the sheets. Wade Wilson sat motionless on the mattress edge. The easy charm had vanished. Christine drifted off believing she was safe. Cherished even. She never suspected his stillness wasn't affection. He was calculating. Timing. When the moment felt right, he moved, silent, deliberate. Both hands locked around her throat. At first her body didn't register the threat. Then instinct screamed. She jolted awake, gasping, clawing, thrashing. Nails ripped into his arms and chest. Legs kicked wildly, sheets tangled and tore. Her skull banged the headboard. Arms flailed for anything, his face, his eyes, the lamp. He didn't flinch. He pressed harder. He studied every second of her panic. He waited until her strength bled away. When resistance stopped, he let go. Christine Melton, who had entered the bar radiant, alive, trusting, was now completely still. A deep violet band circled her neck. Broken nails. Split lips. Swollen, discolored face. Wade stood up without hurry. He walked to the bathroom mirror. Scratches wept blood down his skin. He didn't blink. He picked up her car keys from the counter, opened the front door, stepped into the pale morning light like any other day. He had strangled a woman while she slept inches away. Then he stole her car. That is how predators truly appear. Not grotesque shadows, but the guy who buys your drink, matches your rhythm, whispers something sweet. The switch flips in heartbeats. She trusted him completely. She never saw the change coming. Blood was still tacky on Wade Wilson's skin when he drove away. Only hours earlier he had choked the life from Christine Melton in her own bed, watched her eyes go vacant, then lifted her keys and slid behind the wheel of her white Nissan Sentra. He kept the speed limit. No frantic swerves. No glance in the rear view. He wasn't fleeing, he was continuing. Diane Ruiz walked her usual route to work that same morning in Cape Coral, Florida. Early sun felt gentle. Air carried typical warmth. Diane, 43, mother of two, moved with the ease of routine. Her son had texted earlier, a short, sweet note about his upcoming band concert. She'd promised she'd be there in the front row. She was already picturing it, smiling softly. Then the white Nissan eased up beside her and stopped. The driver leaned across the passenger seat. Voice polite. Come. He asked for directions to a nearby road. Nothing alarming. Diane stepped closer to point the way. She had helped strangers her whole life without a second thought. In one motion his arm shot out and dragged her inside. She screamed. She fought hard, kicking the dash, slamming fists against the door, clawing for the handle. Lock snapped down. The car surged forward. He said nothing. No threats. No rage. Just silent focus on the road, hands steady. Diane's pulse hammered. Familiar streets gave way to industrial zones, then empty fields, then desolate scrub. He pulled behind a Sam's Club into a forgotten corner where no one would hear. Door opened. He yanked her out onto the dirt. The struggle exploded again. But Diane Ruiz was not finished. She raked his face, drove knees into his legs, shoved with every ounce left. She broke loose and ran, blood already streaking her elbows, terror and fury carrying her forward. That Wade Wilson deserved the death sentence. Dirt coated her lips, feet bare, she staggered across weeds and sharp gravel, yet she pushed forward, frantic, resolute. She nearly escaped. The field's boundary loomed close. The road waited just ahead. Vehicles hummed faintly in the distance. This time no cry escaped her. She reserved her air for speed. She understood. Any pause, even brief, and he'd seize her. But he skipped, pursuing on foot. He slid back into the vehicle. The engine's growl rolled like storm behind her, tires ripping soil. She glanced rearward. Too slow. The car slammed her from behind with brutal impact. Her frame hurled ahead, then collapsed onto earth. Miraculously, breath lingered. She attempted to drag herself. A hand shifted. Her head twisted. He backed up, aligned precisely, and struck her repeatedly, over and over, until the meadow fell utterly still. Diane Ruiz, who had only paused to guide a stranger seeking directions, was no more. Her remains lay abandoned amid the grass. Wade Wilson sped off in the vehicle he'd taken after ending Christine Melton's life. No remorse, no tremor, no backward glance. He never checked once that at home, Diane's son had just pulled on his clothes. He rehearsed for his debut high school marching band show, the event his mother had eagerly anticipated, the one she'd vowed to witness. He glanced at his phone repeatedly, expecting her ring, expecting her arrival. She never appeared. By the hour Wade Wilson had claimed 2 lives that same morning, he'd scattered far more than crimson stains. He'd abandoned tire impressions, genetic traces, prints, and endless anguish. Yet he'd also abandoned something unforeseen. Something no murderer anticipates will pursue him. A witness who exposed him deliberately, not by chance. That witness, his own biological father. Wade dialed him personally. Not an attorney, not an ally, not anyone to aid escape. He reached Stephen Tessa. The same father who'd cradled him as an infant now picked up. Oblivious that the voice would etch eternal wounds into his spirit. The exchange stayed brief, detached. No urgency colored Wade's words. No sobs. No exhaustion. He stated plainly, I ended 2 lives. No justification, no pause. When pressed for reason, Wade delivered words that chilled the nation. I simply felt like it. Nothing more. No fury, no sorrow, just an icy declaration like a youngster explaining a whim to sample something novel. His father went rigid. Silence stretched. Then he disconnected and contacted authorities. Certainty rang clear. No hesitation about duty. His child had turned monstrous. Now he must intervene. Authorities located Wade swiftly in Cape Coral, still inside the stolen vehicle, marked by blood smears, contusions, and wreckage that narrated events before words formed. He offered no fight, no denial. He uttered scarcely anything. Yet the admission already existed, preserved in the mind of the sole person unable to erase it. That instant marked not merely Wade Wilson's captivity's close, nor solely a trial's dawn. It unveiled to the world a remorseless predator's visage. It fractured households, spurred media frenzy, ignited screaming banners. For Wade, though, it registered as routine. One motion, one progression, one segment in a far deeper abyss than surfaced yet, because this marked no conclusion. It served as mere prelude. Okay. All right. Mr. Wilson nodded his head now. A judge, this is a letter from the adoptive parents of Mr. Wilson. It's been 5 years since the worst of this began. You can't possibly understand how sorry we are for the families affected by this tragedy. We cannot change the past, but we wish we could. On that fateful day 5 years ago, not only were the lives and the dreams of 2 women lost with their families left behind in shock and grief, but another family was left shocked and grieved over a different kind of loss. It's easy to recognize the victims and their families and to feel profound sympathy for all they suffered and lost. When Wade Wilson stepped into the courtroom for his trial's opening, observers avoided his gaze. They stared, not from unfamiliarity, but because he now bore zero resemblance to the youth who'd competed in athletics, occupied a church bench with his adoptive kin, or grinned in old yearbook shots. That Wade had vanished. In his stead loomed something icier, more alien, infinitely more perilous. Ink covered his features, each marking more unsettling than the prior. Glory sprawled boldly across his brow. Beneath one eye, mocked the space silently. Yet the swastika etched under his right eye chilled every soul there. The judge permitted concealment via cosmetics for proceedings, but harm had spread already. Journalists had glimpsed it. The public had glimpsed it. The victim's kin had glimpsed it. No cosmetic layer could veil his transformation. He transcended mere violent history. He embodied walking hatred, disorder, ruin. Even amid guards, counsel, lenses, Wade Wilson appeared aligned with forces beyond the living. During hearings, emotion stayed scarce. No weeping, no overt regret. At times he reclined, lips curling faintly. At others he gazed blankly, indifferent. Crime scene visuals drew no wince. His father's testimony stirred nothing. He never shifted when Christine Melton's and Diane Ruiz's mothers broke down, words choking. He remained seated, face a tattooed veil, impassive, inscrutable. Prosecutors depicted him as a motionless executioner, easy task. Proof abounded, DNA, recorded admission, observers, and core reality. Wade slew not from heat, vengeance, terror. He slew because desire struck. He admitted it outright. Jurors sat paralyzed as images cycled. Christine's battered form, Diane's still shape in weeds, wounds to throats, features humanity. Yet photos alone didn't drain color from faces. It was the watcher displaying faint contentment. He occupied the bench with glory, branded on skin and a grin that crawled across jurors' nerves. By day's close, guilt stood unquestioned. Sole debate, whether execution sufficed. The chamber shifted as the decision echoed. Quiet carried not triumph, but sorrow granted voice at last. Christine Melton's and Diane Ruiz's loved ones had endured almost 5 years awaiting that instant. 5 years of nightmares, courtroom postponements, tabloid headlines, and recollections they never wished to unearth again. And now, with the jurors departed and the verdict sealed, it was their moment to voice the unspeakable. They hadn't arrived seeking absolution. They came to honor the lost. Christine's cousin, Samantha, approached the stand with shaking fingers and tear-filled gaze. She spoke of celebrations marred by vacant seats, of a grieving mother clinging to the delusion that her daughter still breathed because reality's blade cut too deep. Her tone fractured as she recalled how Christine always offered redemption to the broken. How she likely would have offered Wilson a gentle smile that fateful evening, simply because kindness defined her. A soul who hunted light in the darkest hearts, even when it led to her own destruction. Next came Diane Ruiz's brother. His fists balled so fiercely the skin over his knuckles blanched ghostly pale. He painted Diane as a warrior, a devoted parent, a tireless worker who dragged herself home after endless shifts yet still knelt to guide schoolwork. He recounted how her young son stood vigil at the window on the day she vanished forever, clutching his trumpet, clad in crisp marching band attire. The child preserves the uniform now, neatly tucked on his mattress, untouched since the afternoon she failed to return. Yet it was Diane's father, Felix Ruiz, who unleashed words that froze the entire chamber in icy silence. No shouts. No sobs. Merely a piercing gaze locked onto Wade Wilson, the unflinching look only a parent who has lowered their child into earth can wield. Then he uttered the single line etched forever into memory. I will be there when he draws his final breath. That's a vow. No plea for leniency. No demand for explanations. Simply the desire to witness the conclusion. The air in the room thickened unbearably afterward. Even the judge paused, drawing a slow breath before proceeding. The anguish radiating outward was deafening. It seeped through plaster and timber, stained every pew, and lodged deep within the marrow of all who witnessed it. But beyond those doors, a shadow far more sinister was already swelling. While society assumed Wade Wilson now sat caged, condemned to execution, stripped bare of control, what if confinement marked no finale? What if the truth was that he grew far more lethal within those walls? Many imagine incarceration as the curtain falling. That sealing a murderer away extinguishes the threat forever. That steel barriers, razor coils, and numbered uniforms strip the beast from the flesh. Yet Wade Wilson refused mere survival behind bars. He mutated there. He grew neither diminished, frail, nor solitary. Instead he swelled, more audacious, more vocal, more venomous. The figure who entered Lee County Jail in 2019 bore little resemblance to the one who faced judgment 5 years on. That metamorphosis was no coincidence. Upon initial capture, Wilson appeared as a scarred product of brutality, some ink, some old wounds. By trial's dawn, however, he had reshaped himself into an abomination. His features turned living manifesto of malice. The term glory, now scarred across his brow in jagged obsidian script. Below one eye, tilted mockingly, a sadistic punchline aimed at every soul he had shattered. But the swastika etched beneath his right eye branded him utterly. So grotesque the judge demanded cosmetic concealment throughout hearings. Cosmetics could veil nothing beneath. Those markings held no randomness. They were deliberate emblems, declarations of loyalty, venom, and gang bonds. He had pledged to Unforgiven, that vicious white supremacist faction infamous for savage methods, ironclad devotion oaths, and extremist doctrine. One does not casually enter groups like Unforgiven. Membership demands proof. And Wade Wilson delivered swiftly. He stayed far from silent, far from shadows. He forged alliances. He drew followers. He cultivated ties among fellow predators, traded correspondence with extremist overlords, and cultivated a legend that nourished his arrogance. His cell morphed into a war room. The ink was no mere outburst. It served as billboard. He craved visibility, terror, obedience. Then arrived the breakout scheme. No haphazard murmur in gloom. This was meticulous, clockwork, nightmarish. With cellmate Joseph Katz, Wilson engineered an operation resembling a celluloid breakout thriller. They dismantled a fortified window pane, layered security glazing. No sudden shatter. They fractured it gradually across days, perhaps weeks, employing makeshift or pilfered implements. They disassembled the steel surround incrementally, concealing every flaw from routine patrols. Astonishingly, they even detached a massive metal stool riveted solidly to the cell floor. Its absence went undetected until irretrievable. Escape window, 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. when watch thinned and the facility drowsed. A getaway vehicle idled in wait outside. Hand-scrawled directives mapped paths, sequences, visual cues. This was no desperate plea. It was calculated warfare. Wilson intended to evaporate to cheat final reckoning. Yet fate intervened. A fellow prisoner, terrified or currying favor, alerted authorities. Wilson and Katz were intercepted prior to execution. Still, irreparable harm lingered. Officials grasped Wilson's escalating coordination and limitless resolve to dominate. Charges followed: attempted escape, criminal mischief. Additional years stacked atop his death warrant. Even post-failure, Wilson refused dormancy. His reach intensified. When brute force faltered, he pivoted to the invisible: narcotics. In 2023 mid-trial Wade Wilson collapsed from methamphetamine in his cell. Guards revived him. Survival triggered probes revealing a distribution ring orchestrated directly from his confinement. He directed a compact web of insiders and external couriers. Contraband parachuted near perimeter, retrieved by privileged inmates. Communication flowed via encrypted letters, whispered relays, furtive scraps exchanged prisoner to prisoner, echoing vintage espionage. Wilson trafficked, not merely consumed. He entered no contest plea, earning 12 more years plus $50,000 penalties. Irrelevant in context, he already stared at lethal injection. The monetary slap served only symbolism, proof that even in a fortress designed to crush spirits, Wade Wilson continued constructing authority, notoriety, dominion among society's vilest. The machine labored to shackle him, yet bars imprisoned flesh alone. His intellect roamed free. His grasp extended. His legend proliferated. Throughout trial appearances, escape schemes still raw, overdose scarcely faded, visage emblazoned with icons of demise and bigotry, he grinned. Like someone who recognized he had outmaneuvered expectations entirely. Wade Wilson transcended prisoner status. He became a specter, one that continued to feed. Entombed behind massive concrete slabs and unyielding steel barriers. Most prisoners wither. Cut off from the world, erased from memory, stripped to nothing, yet never truly measured. The prison system could not crush him. Instead it forged him sharper, colder, within the suffocating 6-by-9-foot box that became both cage and crucible. He did more than endure. He schemed, he constructed, he consumed information like oxygen. After the botched escape plot collapsed, the institution responded with vice-like force. Extended lockdowns, intensified camera sweeps, slashed privileges, tighter chains on every movement. Wade Wilson did not bend. He mutated. Like a stealth pathogen threading through the prison's arteries, he located new veins to pump his influence outward. When a guard's gaze drifted, he forged silent alliances. When meal trays slid through slots, folded scraps of paper changed hands. One day a single intercepted cipher unraveled far more than intended. Proof of a disciplined, death-row-orchestrated methamphetamine empire. The network operated in near silence but with relentless consistency. Pickups and drops were staged just beyond the razor-wire perimeter. Contraband flowed inward through trustees. Inmates awarded limited yard or work crew privileges inside the facility. Crystal meth was the lifeblood commodity. Wade was never merely a participant or addict. He was architect, chess master, and shadow CEO of the entire apparatus. Orders traveled via faint pencil scrawls, lemon juice invisible ink that darkened over flame, pages torn from Gideon Bibles, or slipped beneath seemingly innocent commissary requisition forms. Some notes were incinerated the instant they were deciphered. Others never escaped the cell block at all, passed hand to hand down the tier in poisonous, wordless relays. Then came the breaking point. In 2023, Wade Wilson convulsed inside his cell, body racked by a methamphetamine overdose so severe his heart nearly quit. Guards found him blue-lipped and unresponsive, foam at the corners of his mouth. Emergency response teams fought for long minutes to drag him back across the line. That collapse did not humble or halt him. It betrayed him. The medical emergency became the hairline fracture that split the whole operation wide open. Smuggling corridors, drop points, encrypted command chains, the steady grooming of new couriers and lieutenants. At the apex of that pyramid, controlling every thread, sat Wade Wilson. Prison psychologists and gang intelligence analysts were summoned to gauge the scale of the threat. Their reports discarded any notion of deranged chaos. What they documented was chillingly organized. Rigid hierarchy, calculated risk management, unmistakable purpose. Wade was not spiraling. He was ascending, methodical, disciplined, charismatic enough to inspire devotion, manipulative enough to stay personally insulated while others carried the heaviest risk. Inside these walls, hate-driven factions like Unforgiven survive on two scarce currencies: a forged sense of belonging and unbreakable loyalty. Wade supplied both in abundance. In exchange, he claimed something rarer and more dangerous than muscle or protection. He claimed command. One seasoned correctional expert later phrased it bluntly: he wasn't being corrected. He was recruiting and drilling a private militia. The assessment was no hyperbole. In an institution engineered to isolate and contain the worst predators, Wade Wilson had quietly transformed into icon, warlord, living manifesto. While the free world waited for the state to deliver its promised justice, he had already crowned himself king inside those walls. Wade Wilson's final sunrise will arrive like every other on death row, inside the same 6-by-9-foot concrete coffin, wrapped in dead silence, observed every second by officers conditioned to avoid direct eye contact unless protocol demands it. Once the Florida Department of Corrections fixes the execution date, procedure activates with surgical exactness. 24 hours before the appointed hour, Wilson is extracted from regular death row housing and relocated to the death watch cell, a slightly larger sterile pen-positioned footsteps from the execution suite. White painted walls. Steel frame cot bolted to the floor. No books, no photos, no personal effects, no corners dark enough to retreat into. The room exists for one purpose only, to force the condemned to sit with time's unblinking countdown. From that transfer forward, he is never alone. 2 officers maintain constant visual watch in rolling shifts, logging every breath, every shift of posture. Telephone privileges are severed except for attorney consultations. Outgoing and incoming mail ends. Coded notes cease. Influence evaporates. Only the slow drip of minutes remains. He is offered a final meeting with a chosen spiritual advisor or immediate family. Whether anyone accepts the invitation is unknown. His biological father, the man who answered the phone when Wade calmly confessed to murdering 2 women and then turned him in, has publicly declared he will be present. Not for reconciliation behind visitation glass, but seated among the official witnesses, watching every second of the procedure that ends the life of the son he handed to authorities. Florida's execution protocol is machined to the millimeter. The condemned may request a last meal, but statute caps the cost at $40, ingredients must be sourced locally, and preparation occurs in the prison kitchen. No extravagant spreads, no cinematic excess. If Wilson orders anything, it will likely be plain. Cheeseburger, French fries, perhaps a cup of ice cream, or, as is common in the final hours, nothing at all. Appetite often vanishes beneath the weight of what is coming. At exactly 6 p.m., 2 guards escort him the short walk to the execution chamber. The space is small, bright, and brutally clinical. No movie-style gloom, no theatrical spotlights, just cold white fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead and the sharp tang of hospital-grade disinfectant. In the center stands a single padded gurney ringed by cardiac monitors, 4 poles, thick leather restraints, and a large viewing window for approved witnesses. Wilson is positioned flat on his back. Officers methodically secure wrists, ankles, chest, and thighs with heavy straps. A medical technician inserts 2 intravenous lines, 1 primary, 1 backup, running to a small console in the corner that houses 3 syringes. Florida employs the standard 3-drug sequence. First an anesthetic to plunge him into unconsciousness within seconds, then rocuronium bromide to paralyze every voluntary muscle, and finally potassium acetate to arrest the heart. The entire infusion usually finishes in under 10 minutes, though for those watching through the glass it stretches into a different kind of eternity. Immediately before the drugs begin to flow, the warden asks if the condemned has any final statement. The words are recorded, reviewed, and, if deemed appropriate, eventually released to the public. Some inmates offer apologies. Others recite scripture or name their victims. A few choose silence. Wade Wilson has never fit the pattern. When he first confessed to his father over the telephone, his entire admission consisted of 5 words: "I just wanted to do it." The question now hanging in the air is whether those same 5 syllables will also serve as his farewell to the world. The process is not dramatic. It is mechanical, antiseptic, irreversible, much like the man strapped to the gurney. Yet the uncertainty endures. Will he offer remorse at the very end, or will he exit repeating the precise phrase that launched the nightmare? "I just wanted to do it." In the weeks and months after sentencing, the courtroom lights dimmed, the news trucks rolled away, and the public's attention chased newer tragedies. But the families of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz could not turn the page. Grief refuses to obey broadcast schedules. It lingers in the empty place settings at holiday tables, rides shotgun on long silent drives, occupies the rooms where voices used to echo. It hides inside unread text message threads, missed call notifications that were never cleared, and memories that refused to soften with time. For these families, the deepest wound was not only loss. It was the realization that the signs had been visible for years and almost everyone looked away. Wade Wilson did not erupt without warning. His violence was not a sudden fracture. It was the culmination of a slow, ugly smoldering that stretched back through adolescence. Multiple concussions and head trauma before he reached adulthood, creeping paranoia, social withdrawal, a stark behavioral collapse around age 13, then the steady escalation of offenses, petty theft, escalating burglaries, assaults. Please smash that subscribe button. This isn't mere entertainment. This is your shadowy alert in the night. Because the real horrors don't lurk beneath your mattress. They perch beside you at the dimly lit tavern. They request street guidance. They wait under harsh, flickering lights, amid the sharp tang of disinfectant. One lone stretcher rests in the middle, encircled by cold instruments, binding straps, and the thick observation pane where chosen observers will stand witness. Wilson will recline motionless as guards cinch his wrists, ankles, torso, and limbs tight. A technician will slide in dual 4 lines, one main, one reserve. Both feed into the compact device tucked in the room's corner, loaded with 3 syringes. Florida relies on a 3-drug sequence. The initial one plunges him into darkness in moments. The next, rocuronium bromide, locks every muscle rigid. The final, potassium acetate, halts his pulse forever. The entire sequence unfolds in under 10 minutes, yet eternity stretches for those forced to gaze upon it. Before the poisons flow, Wade will face the ritual question. Any parting statement? It will be captured, logged, and, if approved, shared with the outside world. Some condemned offer remorse. Others recite holy verses. A few remain mute. But Wade Wilson defies the pattern. His earliest admission to his father boiled down to 5 chilling syllables. I just wanted to do it. Now the world holds its breath, wondering if those will echo as his farewell. This isn't scripted drama. It's sterile, merciless, irreversible, mirroring his nature. Yet the doubt persists. Will remorse surface at last, or will he depart with the same hollow confession that ignited the nightmare? I just wanted to do it. In the wake of judgment, the courtroom cleared, the news dimmed, the spotlights shifted elsewhere. But the kin of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz found no escape. They couldn't. Sorrow ignores headlines. It clings in hushed rooms, claims vacant seats at family gatherings, rides shotgun on silent drives, haunts the voids once filled with joy. It lurks in unread messages, unanswered rings, recollections that refuse to dim. For these families, the agony wasn't solely loss. It stemmed from what went unseen. The warnings had whispered for years. Wade Wilson never simply broke. He didn't erupt from nothing. His darkness didn't spring from emptiness. It smoldered gradually, unnoticed until the flames consumed everything. The head injuries from childhood blows. The growing delusions, the withdrawal, the drastic change at age 13, the mounting offenses, larceny, violence first. There are mysteries surrounding this case that I still can't unravel, questions that linger without clear resolution. Yet there are also undeniable facts, details so critical that, if the jury had been made aware of them during the trial, it's entirely possible they would have reached a dramatically different conclusion. The most glaring issue involves the ballistics evidence and the firearm itself. The shell casings recovered from the crime scene simply did not match the weapon prosecutors insisted was the murder weapon. That mismatch remains one of the most troubling oversights in the entire investigation, and disturbingly, it has never once been raised or examined during any of the subsequent court hearings, appeals, or reviews. Just 60 minutes before Francis Newton was scheduled to be strapped to the gurney for lethal injection, the governor of Texas issued a last-minute stay, bringing the entire process to a sudden halt. Francis had been convicted of the brutal murders of her husband and their 2 young children, but from the beginning the evidence presented in court felt incomplete, inconsistent, even questionable. Forensic experts and independent reviewers later pointed out serious problems with how the ballistics and gunshot residue tests were conducted and interpreted. Others went further, suggesting the real shooter might have been someone entirely different, someone never seriously investigated. With doubt after doubt accumulating and hanging heavily over the case, the governor was forced to confront an agonizing question. Was the state of Texas preparing to execute a woman who might actually be innocent? Even Francis, in her final statements and interviews, calmly but persistently drew attention to critical elements of her own case that had never received proper scrutiny or cross-examination. One of my neighbors told investigators they distinctly heard gunshots around 7:30 that evening. Why on earth was that person never called to the witness stand during the trial? I only discovered this detail myself when I read through the clemency report years later. I had never even known it existed until then. That neighbor should have been subpoenaed and allowed to testify under oath. That was exactly the kind of exculpatory or at least contradictory evidence the defense team was obligated to pursue, and yet they never did. Hearing Frances speak in her own measured, reflective voice forces you to wrestle with an uncomfortable possibility. Were these the careful words of a guilty woman trying to explain herself, or were they the quiet, desperate warnings of an innocent person who felt the system closing in around her? In this episode of Bruised Voice, we're going to carefully walk through every key moment of what happened on that terrible night, revisit the mounting questions and near misses that almost led to her being spared, and explore the final reasons her execution was allowed to proceed, making Frances Elaine Newton the first black woman executed by the state of Texas in the modern era. Before we go any deeper into this haunting and bitterly contested true crime story, if you're finding this compelling, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to Bruised Voice. That support really helps us continue covering these complex, often overlooked cases that deserve to be heard. Everything changed forever on the night of April 7, 1987 in Houston. Police dispatch received an urgent call reporting a shooting at an apartment complex off West Mount Houston Road. When Deputy Harold Ricks pulled up to the scene at approximately 8:27 p.m., he found Frances Newton standing outside the unit with her cousin, Sandra Nelms. Both women appeared shaken, though in very different ways. Inside the apartment, however, the sight that greeted Deputy Ricks would haunt law enforcement personnel for years. He entered slowly, methodically. The sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder still drifted faintly through the rooms. On the living room couch lay the body of Frances's husband, 23-year-old Adrian Newton, slumped awkwardly with a single gunshot wound to the head. A dark pool of blood had spread beneath him and soaked into the fabric. In the small bedroom down the hall, their 7-year-old son, Alton, was still in his bed, the covers pulled up around him, but a bullet had pierced his chest. In the crib just a few feet away, their youngest child, 21-month-old Farah, had been shot in exactly the same manner, execution style at close range. There were no signs of forced entry, no splintered doorframe, no shattered window, no pry marks. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. No jewelry, no cash, no electronics, no valuables of any kind missing. This was clearly not a robbery gone wrong. Whoever committed these murders had walked through the front door, carried out the killings with chilling efficiency, and simply left. Word of the triple homicide spread quickly through the neighborhood. Within minutes, family members, friends, and curious residents began gathering outside the yellow police tape. Some sobbed openly, others stood motionless, staring at the apartment door in stunned disbelief. Low murmurs of speculation rippled through the crowd, but no one had solid answers, only fear, grief, and endless questions. After Deputy Ricks radioed confirmation of the fatalities, additional patrol units arrived to secure the perimeter. Detectives soon followed, taking control of the scene. The apartment was taped off and declared a crime scene. Uniformed deputies gently but firmly kept distraught relatives and onlookers at a safe distance. Under the harsh sodium glow of the streetlights, Frances Newton stood apart from the growing cluster of people. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, almost protectively. Her face showed no obvious signs of recent crying, no swollen eyes, no reddened cheeks, no streaked mascara, just an eerie, composed stillness that struck several officers as unusual under the circumstances. Detective Michael Parinello approached her carefully. "Frances," he said in a calm, measured tone, "can you walk me through everything that happened tonight?" She answered without hesitation. She explained that she had been at her cousin's house earlier in the evening and returned home to find her family already dead. She insisted she hadn't heard any gunshots, any screams, anything out of the ordinary. Then, before the detective could even pose the question, she added firmly, "I didn't do this." Meanwhile, detectives separated Frances and Sandra Nelms so they could take independent statements and compare their accounts. Sandra was cooperative but noticeably anxious, fidgeting and avoiding prolonged eye contact. When Detective Talton gently pressed her about anything unusual she might have noticed that evening, she hesitated for a long moment before mentioning the blue bag. According to Sandra, Frances had shown up at her residence completely unannounced. No phone call, no text, no warning whatsoever. She simply appeared at the door and asked Sandra to ride back to the apartment with her. Before they left, though, Frances walked across the yard to the abandoned house next door, a dilapidated property the family occasionally used to store old furniture and boxes. She was carrying a blue canvas bag. She disappeared inside the empty structure for a short time, then re-emerged without the bag and without offering any explanation about what she had done or why. At that moment, Sandra thought the behavior seemed peculiar, but she didn't press for details. Now, standing outside an apartment where 3 members of Frances's family had just been shot to death, the memory took on an entirely different weight. Detective Talton asked Sandra to take him to the exact location. They drove the short distance back to Sealy Street. Behind the sagging, rotting porch of the vacant house, inside a dusty hallway closet whose door barely latched, they located the blue canvas bag exactly where Sandra remembered. Inside lay a .25 caliber Raven Arms pistol. The weapon appeared clean on the surface, with no visible blood or obvious signs it had been recently fired, but ballistics testing would later conclude that this was the firearm responsible for the bullets that killed Adrian Newton, Alton Newton, and Farah Newton. As the investigation deepened, detectives uncovered painful details about the state of Frances and Adrian's marriage. Friends and relatives confirmed the relationship had deteriorated significantly. Adrian was rumored to be heavily involved with drugs, which created constant strain and arguments. Although the couple was technically separated, they continued living under the same roof, sharing the apartment while both discreetly seeing other people. Tensions had escalated in recent months, yet no one who knew them anticipated that friction would explode into triple homicide. The morning after the murders, Frances voluntarily met with detectives and even handed over the clothing she said she had worn the previous night. Laboratory analysis of her skirt revealed noticeable deposits of gunshot residue concentrated around the waistband, residue patterns consistent with a small-caliber handgun being fired at very close range while the weapon was tucked into or near the waist area. The pistol itself was traced through its serial number to a man named Michael Mouton, someone Frances had dated on and off. Michael told investigators he hadn't seen the gun in several months because he had loaned it to his cousin, Jeffrey Effelo. By coincidence, or perhaps not, Jeffrey Effelo was not only Frances's childhood friend but also her boyfriend at the time of the murders. Jeffrey confirmed he normally kept the pistol in a dresser drawer in his bedroom. Since Frances regularly visited his home to wash and fold his laundry, she would have had easy repeated access to that drawer and the weapon inside it whenever she chose. Investigators uncovered yet another layer that prosecutors would later emphasize heavily. Just weeks before the killings, Frances had quietly taken out 3 separate life insurance policies. One policy covered her own life, one covered her husband Adrian, and one covered their daughter Farah, each with a face value of $50,000. Their son Alton already had an existing policy in place. Frances named herself the sole beneficiary on both Adrian's and Farah's new policies. To the district attorney's office, the timing and structure of these policies screamed financial motive. When confronted, Frances admitted she had forged Adrian's signature on the application forms. She maintained that she only did so to secure a better future for the children in case anything happened to the parents. Prosecutors countered that the policies formed part of a cold, calculated plan. Trying to reconstruct the timeline of that final afternoon and evening, detectives learned that Adrian's brother, Sterling, had stopped by the apartment earlier. Around 6 p.m., Frances asked Sterling to leave so she and Adrian could have a private conversation. Not long afterward, Adrian received a phone call from Ramona Bell, the woman he had been romantically involved with outside the marriage. Frances answered the phone first, spoke briefly, then passed the receiver to her husband. Ramona later told police that even after the handoff, she could still hear Frances's voice clearly in the background, talking, moving, remaining very much present in the room during the call. During that chilling phone call, Adrian confessed he felt exhausted, yet refused to drift off until Frances exited the home. He simply didn't feel secure with her present. That very night, Adrian's buddy, Alance Harrison, had arranged to link up with him. They chatted earlier, but when Alance rang back between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m. to lock in details, Frances answered instead. She said to wait, then vanished from the line. Alance lingered on hold for almost 45 minutes before finally disconnecting in frustration. Less than an hour afterward, between 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m., Adrian and the kids lay lifeless. Frances and Sandre reached the apartment, stumbled upon the grim scene, and dialed 911. Deputy Harold Ricks arrived at 8:27 p.m. Despite mountains of clues implicating her, Frances stubbornly rejected any role in the slayings. She insisted the true cause behind her husband and children's deaths had zero link to her. It stemmed from vengeance. In her version, Adrian owed $1,500 to a shadowy drug figure called Charlie. That unpaid sum had dragged peril straight into their household. She cast herself as a helpless observer, claiming someone tied to this elusive Charlie had targeted Adrian. Sadly, the little ones got trapped in the violence. Back then, I knew my husband owed cash to this man he dealt drugs for. The guy isn't some invention in my head, you know. That situation was genuine. It was happening and it left my husband so paranoid at times. Sometimes we'd return home and Allison would step out of his room saying, "Mom, Dad's sleeping under the bed, under his bed." We wouldn't spot his car anywhere, but there he'd be, curled up underneath, asleep. So that tension was real. And naturally, when I learned my husband and children had been murdered, that was my immediate suspicion. To Frances, this tale neatly accounted for the killings and deflected suspicion elsewhere. Yet investigators uncovered no trace of any Charlie, and Adrienne's relatives firmly denied he ever touched drugs. His mother spoke out sharply to the press. "There ain't no Charlie. She is Charlie." meaning they were convinced Frances bore the guilt, and the drug dealer yarn was merely a cover. That accusation stood out sharply in the ordeal. Frances maintained her innocence. Still, the proof, her behavior, and her own kin's words painted a starkly opposing picture. 2 years prior to the tragedy, Frances received 3 years probation for forgery. A past boss later testified she was dismissed for embezzling funds. Prosecutors highlighted these episodes to demonstrate a pattern of deceit and money troubles, bolstering their theory that she eliminated her husband and kids to collect life insurance payouts. On October 25, 1988, Frances was found guilty of capital murder in the deaths of her husband, Adrian, and their 2 young children. Since multiple victims died in one act, she received a death sentence. But the nightmare didn't conclude there. Doubts slowly emerged over time. Ballistics questions surfaced. Did multiple firearms appear at the scene? And if yes, were they examined correctly? A family member even alleged another prisoner boasted of carrying out the killings. One juror confessed they possibly would have decided otherwise with full evidence access, amplifying the unease. Demonstrators waved signs declaring Frances hadn't slain her family. Frances noted her neighbor reported hearing a shot that fatal night, yet that witness never took the stand. Still, the counter-evidence loomed heavily. Prior to the murders, she'd already served 3 years probation for forgery, revealing deceit and financial strain. Mere weeks earlier, Frances purchased 3 life insurance policies, naming herself sole beneficiary for Adrienne's and Farah's coverage. To the state, this screamed financial incentive. Around 6 p.m. that evening, Frances urged Adrienne's brother, Sterling, to vacate their joint apartment for a private talk with Adrienne. Sterling departed. Soon after, Ramona Bell, Adrienne's romantic interest, phoned. Frances grabbed the receiver first before passing it over. Ramona later informed detectives she overheard Frances shouting in the background, and Adrienne remarked he felt weary but couldn't rest while Frances remained, fearing for his safety. Then Harrison, Adrienne's pal set to meet him, called. Frances picked up, asked him to hold, and never returned. The friend waited nearly 45 minutes before quitting, prompting questions. What occupied Frances that long? Why didn't Adrienne answer himself? The most eerie detail followed. That night, Frances appeared unannounced at her cousin's place, clutching a blue bag concealing a firearm. She stashed the bag, then requested her cousin trail her home. Upon reaching the apartment, they discovered Adrienne and the 2 children deceased. Frances promptly called 911. Everything transpired between 6 p.m. and 8:37 p.m. that murderous evening. Adrienne's parents, the victim's kin, begged for mercy. They never accepted Frances's innocence, yet opposed capital punishment. Nevertheless, they held firm to her guilt. For a moment, their appeal seemed promising. In December 2004, mere hours from execution, Texas Governor Rick Perry issued a 120-day stay for fresh forensic review. But key items were already tainted. Frances's skirt, potentially bearing gunshot residue, had been compromised, and ultimately the bullets linked to the weapon she'd concealed. Courts determined the fresh material altered nothing. On September 12, 2005, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles unanimously approved proceeding. The next day, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected her last plea. No further reprieves awaited. On the evening of September 14, 2005, inside the Huntsville unit, Frances Newton, after almost 17 years on death row, was escorted to the execution chamber. She was secured to the gurney, leather straps cinched firmly over her arms and legs. Her parents sat silently amid the small group. Explore ballistics evidence doubts similar Texas death row cases heightened suspenseful tone more during that tense and uneasy phone call. Adrian quietly admitted he was utterly exhausted, his voice heavy with fatigue, but he stubbornly refused to let himself fall asleep or even close his eyes until Frances had finally left the house. He confessed openly that he no longer felt safe or protected in her presence, that something deep inside warned him danger lingered whenever she was near. That same fateful evening, Adrian had made plans to connect with his close friend, Alance Harrison. The two had spoken earlier during the day, coordinating their meetup, but when Alance tried calling back between 7 o'clock and 7:15 p.m. to confirm the exact time and place, it was Frances who picked up the phone instead of Adrian. She told Alance to hold on for just a moment, promising to get Adrian right away, yet she never returned to the line. Alance remained on hold, listening to the eerie silence, growing increasingly unsettled as nearly 45 full minutes dragged by before he finally gave up and hung up, left wondering what could possibly be happening on the other end. Less than an hour later, somewhere between 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m., Adrian and both of the children were already dead, Their lives violently ended in what would soon become one of the most haunting crime scenes investigators had encountered. It was Francis, accompanied by Sandre, who arrived at the apartment shortly afterward, stepped inside, and came face to face with the horrific discovery of the bodies. In that moment of shock, they placed the frantic call to 911. Deputy Harold Ricks was the first law enforcement officer to respond, pulling up to the scene at precisely 8:27 p.m. Even as the mounting physical evidence, witness statements, and timeline inconsistencies pointed squarely in her direction, Frances continued to vehemently deny any involvement whatsoever in the brutal murders of her husband and children. She insisted repeatedly that the real reason behind the killings had absolutely nothing to do with her personally. Instead, she framed the entire tragedy as an act of cold-blooded revenge carried out against her family. According to the story she told detectives over and over, Adrian had accumulated a debt of $1,500 owed to a dangerous drug dealer she identified only as Charlie. That unpaid amount, she claimed, had brought violent threats and real peril directly into their home, turning their once safe space into a target. She carefully portrayed herself as nothing more than an innocent bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, suggesting that someone connected to this mysterious figure named Charlie had come looking for Adrian to collect what was owed, or perhaps to send a deadly message. Tragically, she said, the two young children had simply been caught in the merciless crossfire of that supposed retaliation. At that time, I know that my husband owed money to this guy he was selling drugs for. The guy is not a figment of my imagination, that was real. That was going on, and it had my husband so concerned at times. Sometime we would come home and Allison would come out of his room and say, Mom, Dad, sleep under the bed, under his bed, that we wouldn't see his car anywhere but he'd be under the bed sleep, So, that was something that was going on. And of course, when I find out that my husband and children murdered, that was my first thought. To Frances, this elaborate narrative seemed to neatly explain away the horrifying murders while shifting all suspicion far away from herself and onto an unseen, shadowy criminal underworld. But when detectives dug deeply into her claims, they could find absolutely no trace, no record, no witness, no evidence whatsoever, of any individual named Charlie operating in that capacity. Adrian's own family members were adamant in their rejection of the drug angle entirely. They insisted he had no involvement with narcotics of any kind. His mother became especially outspoken, speaking directly to reporters with raw emotion and certainty. There ain't no Charlie. She is Charlie. In other words, they believed Frances herself was the true source of the danger, and the entire tale about a menacing drug dealer was nothing but a desperate fabrication designed to mislead investigators. That single, piercing statement from his mother became one of the most unforgettable and damning moments in the entire case. Frances continued to proclaim her complete innocence from every angle she could. Yet the accumulating physical evidence, her own inconsistent actions that night, and the powerful statements from her husband's grieving family told an entirely different, and far darker, story. 2 full years before the murders ever took place, Frances had already been convicted and sentenced to 3 years of probation after pleading guilty to forgery charges. Later still, a former employer came forward to testify under oath that they had been forced to terminate her employment because she had been caught stealing money from the company. Prosecutors seized on these prior incidents, presenting them to the jury as clear proof of a long-standing pattern of dishonesty, manipulation, and serious financial desperation. Elements they argued provided a strong and chilling motive, that Frances had deliberately taken the lives of her husband, Adrian, and their 2 young children in order to collect substantial life insurance payouts. On October 25, 1988, after a grueling trial, Frances was convicted of capital murder for the deaths of her husband, Adrian, and their 2 young children. Because the crime involved the murder of multiple people during the same criminal episode, the court imposed the ultimate penalty, death. But even after the verdict and sentencing, the story refused to stay neatly closed. Over the passing years, serious and persistent doubts began to surface and spread. Questions about the ballistics evidence grew louder and more insistent. Had more than one firearm actually been present at the scene that night? And if multiple guns were involved, had investigators tested and examined them thoroughly and correctly? A relative of Frances even came forward with a startling claim, that another inmate in prison had openly bragged about being the one responsible for carrying out the murders. One of the original jurors later admitted publicly that, had they been presented with all of the evidence now in question, they might very well have cast their vote differently during deliberations. These mounting concerns fueled growing public unease. Protesters began appearing outside courthouses and the governor's office, carrying handmade placards and chanting that Frances Newton had not killed her family. Frances herself repeatedly pointed to a key piece of overlooked testimony. Her neighbor had told authorities they distinctly heard the sound of a gunshot on the night of the murders, yet that neighbor was mysteriously never called to the witness stand during the trial. Still, on the opposing side, the weight of the evidence against her remained formidable and difficult to dismiss. Long before the night of the killings, Frances had already been sentenced to 3 years of probation for forgery, establishing an undeniable history of deceit and financial misconduct. Just weeks prior to the murders, she quietly purchased 3 separate life insurance policies, carefully naming herself the sole beneficiary on both Adrienne's policy and the one covering their daughter Farah. To prosecutors and investigators, these moves appeared far from coincidental. They looked like textbook premeditation driven by a clear financial motive. On the evening of the murders, around 6 p.m., Frances deliberately asked Adrienne's brother, Sterling, to leave the shared apartment so she could have a private, uninterrupted conversation with Adrienne. Sterling complied and left the residence. Less than an hour later, a call came in from Ramona Bell, the woman Adrienne had been romantically involved with at the time. Frances answered the phone before Adrienne could reach it, then eventually handed the receiver over. Ramona later told investigators she could clearly hear Frances shouting angrily in the background throughout the conversation, and Adrienne himself said on the call that although he was exhausted and desperately needed rest, he could not allow himself to sleep as long as Frances remained in the house. He simply did not feel safe. A short time later, another call arrived from Lance Harrison, Adrienne's friend who had been expecting to meet him that night. Once again, Frances picked up the phone, told Harrison to hold for a moment, and then disappeared from the line entirely. Harrison stayed connected, waiting in growing confusion and concern for nearly 45 minutes before finally hanging up. Those long, unexplained minutes on hold raised haunting questions. What exactly was Frances doing during that extended absence? And perhaps most disturbingly, why didn't Adrienne himself ever pick up the phone or come to speak with his waiting friend? Then came what many considered the single most suspicious and inexplicable moment of the entire night. That same evening, Frances appeared unexpectedly at her cousin's house, carrying a blue bag that concealed a firearm inside. After hastily hiding the bag at her cousin's place, she asked the cousin to follow her back to the apartment. When the two of them arrived together, they walked in to find Adrienne and the 2 children already dead from gunshot wounds. It was Frances who then placed the emergency call to 911. All of these critical events unfolded in rapid, chilling succession between approximately 6 p.m. and 8:37 p.m. on the night of the murders. In the years that followed, Adrienne's parents, the grieving family of the victims, publicly pleaded for clemency on Frances's behalf. They never wavered in their belief that she was guilty of the crimes, yet they also opposed the death penalty on moral and principled grounds. For a brief period, it appeared their heartfelt plea might succeed. In December 2004, just hours before her scheduled execution date, Texas Governor Rick Perry issued a 120-day reprieve, granting additional time for new forensic testing to be conducted. Unfortunately, by that late stage, crucial pieces of evidence had already been irreparably compromised or mishandled. Frances's skirt, which might have retained detectable traces of gunshot residue, had become contaminated during storage. In the end, forensic analysis still matched the recovered bullets directly to the gun she had hidden at her cousin's home. The courts ultimately ruled that the newly examined material did not sufficiently alter the fundamental strength of the original case. On September 12, 2005, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted unanimously to allow the execution to proceed without further delay. The very next day, September 13, the United States Supreme Court denied her final appeal. This time, no more stays or reprieves would come. On the evening of September 14, 2005, at the Huntsville unit in Texas, Frances Newton, who had spent nearly 17 long years on death row, was escorted into the execution chamber for the final time. She was carefully strapped to the gurney, the thick leather restraints pulled securely tight across her arms, legs, and torso. Her parents sat quietly among the small, somber group of witnesses present to observe the procedure. A hushed cluster of witnesses sat in tense silence behind the thick glass partition, the air thick with unspoken grief and unresolved anger. When the warden leaned in and asked in a low, formal tone if she had any last words to share with those present, Frances Newton offered only the faintest tremor of her head from side to side, then whispered a fragile, barely audible no that seemed to hang in the sterile room like a final surrender. She had refused any special last meal, no symbolic comfort, no fleeting indulgence, so she had eaten the same plain, institutional tray that every other woman in the unit received that afternoon: cold mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans, a slice of white bread. nothing to mark the day as different from any other. As the execution team methodically inserted the 4 lines and the first clear fluid began its slow journey into her arm, Frances turned her head with painful slowness, her dark eyes sweeping across the small group of faces on the other side of the glass. She searched desperately, almost childlike in that moment, for the people who had loved her through everything, her parents, her sisters, hoping perhaps for one last glimpse of forgiveness or simply recognition before the end. Her gaze lingered, heavy with something unspoken, before dropping away. Her lips quivered and parted once more, trembling as if a lifetime of words were fighting to break free in those final seconds. Regret, love, fear, explanation. But no sound came. Only silence. The sedatives surged through her veins with merciless efficiency. A single, dry cough rattled in her throat, raw and involuntary. Then came one sharp, desperate gasp, her chest rising sharply as though trying to pull in one more breath of life. Her eyelids fluttered like dying moths against a window, then stilled completely. The room seemed to hold its collective breath with her. 8 long minutes crawled by in near total quiet, broken only by the soft beeps of monitors and the occasional stifled sob. At precisely 6:17 p.m., the physician stepped forward, checked for signs of life, and spoke the words everyone had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Frances Newton was pronounced dead. She was just 40 years old. A life that had once held promise, laughter, children, now reduced to a still form under a thin white sheet. The emotional weight in the witness room was crushing. One of her sisters crumpled forward in her chair, burying her tear-streaked face deep in the crook of her arms, shoulders shaking with silent, wrenching sobs she could no longer contain. She rocked slightly as though trying to comfort the child she once knew. Beside her, Frances's parents sat gripping each other's hands so tightly their knuckles blanched white. Her mother's free hand rose again and again to wipe at the steady stream of tears carving paths down her lined cheeks. Between soft, broken whispers of, it's over now," she reached to stroke her other daughter's hair, trying to offer the only comfort she had left while her own heart visibly shattered. Yet even in that shared devastation, peace remained elusive. Adrienne's cousins, who had traveled far to bear witness, sat rigid with a different kind of pain, fury mingled with profound sorrow. One of them, voice cracking with barely restrained emotion, later said, "I wanted her to apologize. Just once. To look at us and confess what she took from us. Justice is not served to me, not really. If we had heard even a single word of genuine remorse, something real from her heart, that would have felt like justice. Instead we got nothing." Many others who stood or sat in that suffocating room shared the same stunned disappointment. Frances had left this world without a single parting word, no explanation to ease the victims' families, no admission of guilt, no plea for forgiveness, no final expression of love or sorrow to her own kin. The silence felt louder than any scream. What storm of memories, guilt, terror, or numb resignation must have raged behind those closing eyes in those last agonizing moments? Did the absence of words rob the victim's loved ones of closure, or was her silence itself a kind of confession too painful to voice? We want to know what you feel. Did justice truly arrive that evening, or did the quiet leave wounds that may never heal? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. And if the raw, unflinching stories on Bruised Voice move you, please smash that like button, leave a comment to join the conversation, and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive. Your support keeps these important truths alive in our community. On September 30, 2025, following almost 35 years awaiting execution, Victor Tony Jones received a lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. At the time, he was 64 years of age. This video explores the circumstances surrounding his death, including his final statements and his last requested meal. To fully grasp the tragedy and the reasons he faced capital punishment, we must return to a chilly December morning in 1990, a routine workday that turned deadly within just 2 days of his hiring. It was December 19, 1990, a Wednesday in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Victor Tony Jones reported for his second shift at Nestor Engineering Company, a modest firm run by an older married couple, Jacob and Matilda Nestor. He had started the job only 48 hours before, hired for general maintenance tasks and miscellaneous duties around the premises. The Nestors were generous individuals from the World War II era, diligent people who had bootstrapped their enterprise from scratch. Jacob, an ingenious tinkerer, owned numerous patents related to medical equipment. Matilda handled administrative duties, serving as his trusted assistant and lifelong companion. They extended trust to Victor, providing him an opportunity when few others would, inviting him into their livelihood. Yet Victor harbored different intentions. That morning, carrying a blade, he assaulted both elderly owners inside their own facility. He struck Matilda in the upper neck from behind as she headed toward the restroom. When Jacob rushed to check on the commotion, Victor stabbed him in the torso. Despite being 67 and a decorated veteran, Jacob managed to resist and fire a shot that struck Victor in the head. Tragically, both Nestors succumbed to their injuries that day. As they lay mortally wounded, Victor proceeded to take their wallets, cash, and personal items. Law enforcement soon discovered Victor barricaded within the premises, collapsed on furniture, soaked in blood, with the pilfered goods still on him and an admission spilling from his mouth. To comprehend what drove Victor Tony Jones to commit such violence, we need to examine his early years and the institution that profoundly scarred him. Born in Florida in 1961, details of his youngest years remain scarce. However, records confirm that during his adolescence, he was committed to the Okeechobee School for Boys, a government-operated juvenile facility in the state. Officially, the Okeechobee School aimed to rehabilitate wayward teens through routine, guidance, and renewed prospects. In truth, it functioned as a nightmarish environment. Across many years, Okeechobee, together with its counterpart, the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, became notorious for widespread mistreatment, deprivation, brutality, and fatalities. Residents endured severe beatings, hunger, prolonged solitary confinement, and sexual violation by personnel. Certain youths vanished without explanation. Their remains were later unearthed in unmarked burial sites on the property. Eventually, authorities located over 50 sets of remains, with those deaths receiving inadequate scrutiny and families left uninformed. Victor Tony, on September 30, 2025, following almost 35 years awaiting execution, Victor Tony Jones received a lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. At the time, he was 64 years of age. This video explores the circumstances surrounding his death, including his final statements and his last requested meal. To fully grasp the tragedy and the reasons he faced capital punishment, we must return to a chilly December morning in 1990, a routine workday that turned deadly within just 2 days of his hiring. It was December 19, 1990, a Wednesday in Miami-Dade County, Florida. Victor Tony Jones reported for his second shift at Nestor Engineering Company, a modest firm run by an older married couple, Jacob and Matilda Nestor. He had started the job only 48 hours before, hired for general maintenance tasks and miscellaneous duties around the premises. The Nestors were generous individuals from the World War II era, diligent people who had bootstrapped their enterprise from scratch. Jacob, an ingenious tinkerer, owned numerous patents related to medical equipment. Matilda handled administrative duties, serving as his trusted assistant and lifelong companion. They extended trust to Victor, providing him an opportunity when few others would, inviting him into their livelihood. Yet Victor harbored different intentions. That morning, carrying a blade, he assaulted both elderly owners inside their own facility. He struck Matilda in the upper neck from behind as she headed toward the restroom. When Jacob rushed to check on the commotion, Victor stabbed him in the torso. Despite being 67 and a decorated veteran, Jacob managed to resist and fire a shot that struck Victor in the head. Tragically, both Nestors succumbed to their injuries that day. As they lay mortally wounded, Victor proceeded to take their wallets, cash, and personal items. Law enforcement soon discovered Victor barricaded within the premises, collapsed on furniture, soaked in blood, with the pilfered goods still on him and an admission spilling from his mouth. To comprehend what drove Victor Tony Jones to commit such violence, we need to examine his early years and the institution that profoundly scarred him. Born in Florida in 1961, details of his youngest years remain scarce. However, records confirm that during his adolescence, he was committed to the Okeechobee School for Boys, a government-operated juvenile facility in the state. Officially, the Okeechobee School aimed to rehabilitate wayward teens through routine, guidance, and renewed prospects. In truth, it functioned as a nightmarish environment. Across many years, Okeechobee, together with its counterpart, the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, became notorious for widespread mistreatment, deprivation, brutality, and fatalities. Residents endured severe beatings, hunger, prolonged solitary confinement, and sexual violation by personnel. Certain youths vanished without explanation. Their remains were later unearthed in unmarked burial sites on the property. Eventually, authorities located over 50 sets of remains, with those deaths receiving inadequate scrutiny and families left uninformed. Victor Tony Jones endured this place as a teen, and the traumas inflicted there shadowed him throughout adulthood. Years afterward, in 2024, Florida's lawmakers officially recognized the atrocities committed at Okeechobee and Dozier. Legislation created a reparations initiative, expressing regret for what was termed a singularly disgraceful period in state history, allocating $20 million for victims of the mistreatment. On January 6, 2025, the Florida Attorney General's office officially classified Victor Tony Jones as a survivor of abuse at Okeechobee. By July 2025, funds from the program were transferred to his inmate account, formally admitting the state-sanctioned torment he endured during childhood. Nevertheless, merely 53 days following that deposit, on August 29, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis authorized Victor's execution order. The very government that had compensated him for childhood suffering was now set to end his life. Detractors labeled the situation profoundly inconsistent. Advocates insisted retribution required it. The irony remains stark and inescapable. Florida stood poised to carry out the execution of someone it had previously acknowledged as a casualty of government-endorsed youth abuse. Yet we are moving too quickly forward. To trace how Victor landed on death row, return once more to December 19, 1990, at Nestor Engineering Company. Jacob, often called Jack, Nestor, aged 67 that year, was a World War II veteran. He had enlisted in the U.S. Army and spent 5 years serving in European theaters before coming home in 1946. If this story gripped you, hit that like button, subscribe to Bruised Voice for more deep dives into true crime cases, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts and where you are watching from. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Following World War II, Jacob transformed into both an inventor and a sculptor. He possessed remarkable intelligence, endless creativity, and an incredible work ethic. Throughout his lifetime, Jacob secured no fewer than 24 patents related to medical equipment. Among his creations was a specialized instrument designed for grafting leg arteries during surgery that he also crafted a precise chisel for reshaping the nasal septum in reconstructive procedures. Additionally, he engineered a unique blade suited for hair restoration operations. Remarkably, he even patented a device addressing erectile dysfunction in men. Surgeons and physicians across Florida relied on Jacob's innovations in plastic and reconstructive fields. His tools genuinely preserved lives and greatly enhanced well-being for numerous individuals. Yet Jacob's talents extended far beyond engineering. He excelled as a sculptor too, with pieces exhibited inside Miami's government offices and various spots around the metropolitan area. The stunning frescoes of the Sistine Chapel had profoundly moved him during the war years, igniting a lifelong dedication to art that never faded. Those close to Jacob often recalled his radiant, high-energy grin, razor-sharp wit, and endless supply of humorous remarks. Sarcasm came naturally to him, along with genuine charm and boundless vitality. He cherished his profession, adored his loved ones, and treasured his spouse above all. In 1990, Matilda Dolly Nestor turned 66. Of partial Italian heritage, she served as the nurturing head of the household and had spent decades functioning as Jacob's trusted assistant and essential business collaborator. The couple first connected as teenagers in high school and remained inseparable ever since. Together they forged a shared existence, nurtured 2 offspring, and collaborated daily in their enterprise. Dolly's homemade pasta sauce became legendary, a cherished family tradition her own granddaughter would faithfully recreate years afterward to honor her. She delighted in salon visits and live theatrical performances. Warm-hearted, affectionate, and utterly committed to those she held dear, Dolly embodied devotion. Jacob and Dolly together raised 2 kids and welcomed 4 grandchildren into a home overflowing with affection, joy, and diligent effort. They co-founded Nestor Engineering Company from the ground up. Well into their 60s, the pair continued showing up daily, innovating relentlessly, devising new solutions, and making meaningful contributions. They exemplified decency. They radiated genuine kindness. Unfortunately, that goodness led them to place faith in the wrong individual. Victor Tony Jones joined Nestor Engineering Company around mid-December 1990. The couple required assistance for miscellaneous tasks, facility upkeep, and basic manual labor. Victor appeared to be a suitable candidate. He sought employment and they needed extra hands. The setup felt practical and advantageous for everyone involved. Victor's initial shift occurred on December 18, 1990. Nothing unusual took place. He arrived promptly, completed assigned duties, and departed peacefully. His second shift fell on December 19, 1990. Tragically, it marked his final appearance, and the final day for both Jacob and Matilda Nestor. That morning Victor entered the premises carrying a knife. Its origin, whether carried from elsewhere or picked up on site, remains unclear. What is certain, Victor had resolved to commit robbery against the Nastors. Should resistance arise, he intended lethal force. The assault unfolded during the late morning hours. Matilda Dolly Nastor moved casually toward the restroom located at the building's rear. Unaware of any danger, she had zero suspicion Victor trailed her. She possessed no inkling he wielded a blade. No cause existed for alarm. An employee was simply present to perform tasks. Yet midway along the corridor, Victor closed in from behind. In an instant, without pause or preamble, he swung the weapon and drove it deep into the nape of her neck. The strike sliced through her aorta, the body's primary and most vital artery. Catastrophic injury resulted instantly. Dolly fell. Crimson surged from the gash, spreading across the tiles below. Desperately she attempted to drag herself forward, to escape, to live, but the trauma proved insurmountable. She reached the bathroom threshold before collapsing lifeless. At 66, this loving woman met her end while simply heading to the restroom inside the business she helped build, slain by someone she had employed, someone granted opportunity and trust. Jacob Jack Nestor occupied the primary workspace when disturbances reached him. Perhaps a cry escaped her lips. Perhaps the thud of impact registered. Perhaps instinct alone warned him. Regardless, he hurried from his desk toward the restroom area to check. Rounding the bend, he confronted Victor, blood-soaked, knife in hand. Instant comprehension struck. His beloved wife lay mortally wounded or already gone. Victor now targeted him next. With ferocious intent, Victor charged forward, knife raised toward Jacob. An elderly man fought desperately to protect himself, but at 67, his age left him vulnerable against a much younger, more powerful attacker named Victor. The assailant drove a blade deep into the older man's torso. The knife pierced straight through to his heart, a clearly lethal injury. No medical professional would have doubted that death was inevitable from the instant the weapon struck. Yet the victim did not collapse right away. Even with a mortal gash and crimson flooding from the wound, this 67-year-old World War II survivor, engineer, artist, spouse, and parent refused to surrender. He staggered backward into a nearby workspace, each movement a struggle as blood continued to spill. Soaked in red, his clothing heavy and clinging, he gripped the handle still embedded in his body and yanked the knife free with sheer willpower. He understood his life was slipping away. Still, he resolved to resist until the end. Desperate for rescue, he lunged toward a telephone on the desk, fingers fumbling to press the buttons and summon aid from anybody nearby. Blood made his grip slippery, darkness crept into his sight, energy drained rapidly from his limbs. The call never connected. With no other options left, he turned to the one weapon within reach. From a concealed holster in the room, he drew his compact .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun. Trembling violently, eyes struggling to focus, he lifted the pistol and squeezed the trigger repeatedly, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times in total. The sharp cracks echoed through the confined space. One round found its mark, slamming into Victor's forehead precisely between the eyebrows. Though it struck a critical area, the projectile failed to drive deep enough to end his life. Instead, it became lodged in bone, inflicting a serious but survivable cranial injury. Victor reeled backward, fresh blood streaming down his face, yet he remained upright, aware, and threatening. The wounded defender finally buckled. The immense exertion, extracting the blade, seizing the firearm, unleashing those 5 rounds, had exhausted his final reserves. He crumpled to the ground as cardiac arrest took hold and systems began to fail. Even as the older man lay dying on the floor, Victor loomed above him. Despite his own injury and the gravity of what had transpired, the attacker showed no mercy. He flipped the body to access the pockets more easily. He claimed the wallet, cash inside, a set of keys, a lighter, and a modest coin pouch. Then he returned to the restroom where the second victim, a woman named Dolly, lay motionless. He rifled through her possessions as well, taking her purse, currency, and personal items. Both Jacob and Matilda Nestor, husband and wife, were now gone or moments from death. Victor Tony Jones picked over their remains like a vulture on a war-torn field. Once the theft concluded, he lurched back toward the primary workspace, vision swimming from blood loss at the head wound. Pain throbbed, confusion clouded his thoughts. He dropped heavily onto a sofa close to where his first victim had fallen, crimson staining everything around him. The pilfered wallets bulged in his trousers. The pistol jutted awkwardly from beneath his sleeve. There he remained, sealed inside the locked premises, waiting passively for discovery. Near midday, A delivery courier from a shipping service approached the premises of the small engineering firm to drop off a package. Receiving no response at the entrance, the courier peered through the narrow mail slot. The glimpse inside sent chills down his spine. A shoe or foot visible on the ground, surrounded by a spreading pool of dark liquid. Recognizing the horror immediately, he sought assistance from a nearby resident and dialed for help. Law enforcement responded swiftly. Officers pounded on the door, no reply. They struck harder, still silence. The entrance had been secured from within. With no alternative, they forced entry, shattering the barrier and advancing cautiously, weapons ready for whatever awaited. The interior was a scene of unrelenting brutality. Crimson splattered walls, floors, and doorways alike. In one restroom lay the female victim, Matilda Dolly Nestor, slain by a single thrust to the nape. A crimson lake had formed beneath her. In the workspace rested her husband, Jacob Jack Nestor, chest torn open by a knife now discarded nearby, surrounded by 5 expended cartridge cases. On a couch in the central area sat Victor Tony Jones, drenched in gore, a bullet hole marring his brow. Authorities locked down the location at once. They confirmed no vital signs in either civilian. Jacob and Matilda were deceased. Approaching the suspect with extreme caution, they found him still breathing, though only faintly responsive. Blood masked his features, soaked his garments, and coated his palms. If this story moved you, hit like, share your thoughts and tell us where you are watching from below, and subscribe to Bruised Voice for more raw, unfiltered stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. The firearm, a small .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun belonging to the elderly Jacob, jutted out from beneath the suspect's arm. Authorities quickly took possession of the pistol and patted down the man. Inside his trouser pockets, officers discovered the victim's stolen wallets. His front pockets held cash and personal items lifted from the couple. The proof was undeniable. This individual, later identified as Victor Tony Jones, had fatally attacked Jacob and Matilda Nestor, taken their possessions, and then fallen unconscious right there at the location. Law enforcement detained him and rushed him to medical care for the bullet injury he had sustained. While riding in the patrol vehicle, he offered his initial remark. "That old guy fired at me," he grumbled, adding that his head was throbbing painfully. Detectives pressed for more details, but he declined to elaborate. Hospital staff addressed the wound on his forehead. The projectile remained embedded in bone without reaching brain tissue. He was expected to recover. While physicians tended to him, he uttered a damning admission to one of the nurses, an admission that would doom his case. "I ended those folks," he confessed. "They owed cash, so I had no choice but to do it." Prosecutors formally accused Victor Tony Jones of 2 counts of premeditated homicide, 2 counts of robbery with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of illegal firearm possession by someone with a felony history. That final accusation exposed his previous conviction and confirmed this was not his initial encounter with the justice system. His court proceedings opened in 1993 within Miami-Dade jurisdiction. The case mounted against him appeared insurmountable. The victim's wallets turned up in his clothing. The primary killing instrument, a knife, bore his clear fingerprints. He was discovered trapped inside the premises, drenched in the couple's blood. His hospital confession to medical personnel, combined with physical and scientific findings, painted an unmistakable picture. Matilda had suffered a deep stab to the nape, slicing her major artery. Jacob sustained a chest wound that pierced his heart. Robbery accompanied both killings. State attorneys contended that Victor carried out these cold executions amid a theft. They emphasized it marked merely his second workday. The trusting seniors had offered him employment, yet he repaid generosity with lethal violence. During arguments, prosecutors ridiculed the defendant before the panel, claiming he had wasted every chance provided by the state's juvenile facility, portraying the Okeechobee Boys' School as a supposed haven for reform instead of the harsh environment it truly was. Defense counsel countered that no intent to murder existed initially. The violence erupted from a spiraling dispute, worsened by substance impairment. Records showed narcotics heavily influenced events. Lawyers further proposed the assault stemmed from unpaid wages for incomplete labor, framing it as an outburst fueled by desperation and dependency, not calculated malice. The panel remained unconvinced. The proof proved far too compelling, the savagery too evident. He had plunged a blade into a 66-year-old woman's neck from behind and driven it into a 67-year-old man's torso. He looted them while life ebbed away. Plus, he had admitted guilt outright. The jurors returned a unanimous guilty finding across every charge. 2 premeditated murders, 2 armed thefts, and 1 felon in possession offense. Sentencing deliberations commenced without delay. In the punishment stage, the state pressed for capital punishment, labeling the acts exceptionally vile, brutal, and merciless. 2 vulnerable seniors slain inside their own business. Valuables stripped as they perished. 0 regret displayed. The opposing side pleaded for leniency, highlighting the accused's troubled upbringing, though omitting specifics of institutional mistreatment. They urged a lifetime incarceration over execution. After review, the jurors recommended death, 10-2 for Matilda's killing and 12-0 for Jacob's. The court accepted those suggestions. Victor Tony Jones received a death sentence via electric chair, later amended to injection following Florida's procedural revisions. He also drew life terms for each robbery count. Transferred to the state's maximum security facility in Stark, he awaited his fate on death row. Over the following 35 years, he launched repeated legal challenges, seeking reversal of the verdicts and preservation of his life, yet all efforts failed. If this story moved you, hit like, share your thoughts and tell us where you are watching from below, and subscribe to Bruised Voice for more raw, unfiltered stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. The Florida Supreme Court affirmed the conviction against him. Federal judges declined to step in. His legal team contended that the jurors deserved to learn of the severe mistreatment he endured at the Okeechobee facility, viewing it as crucial mitigating information that might have altered the sentencing decision. Nevertheless, the judiciary rejected this position, determining the claim was procedurally defaulted since he failed to present it at the initial trial or in previous appellate challenges. Then in 2024, an unusual development unfolded. Florida's lawmakers enacted a restitution initiative for individuals who survived mistreatment at the Okeechobee and Dozier institutions. They issued an official apology for the atrocities committed there and allocated $20 million in funds to provide payments to those affected. On January 6, 2025, officials from the Florida Attorney General's Department officially acknowledged Victor Tony Jones as someone who had suffered abuse at Okeechobee. By July 2025, the government transferred settlement funds directly into his inmate account, recognizing the childhood torment and cruelty he experienced under state supervision. Remarkably, only 53 days afterward, on August 29, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis issued the warrant for Victor's execution, setting the date for September 30, 2025. The irony could not have been more glaring. The state of Florida stood poised to put to death a person it had recently compensated precisely because he had been a victim of government-sanctioned child abuse. Public reaction was one of deep anger. The Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops dispatched a formal letter to the governor, urging him to reduce the sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of release. Their executive director, Michael Sheedy, stated plainly, "The state cannot, on one side, distribute restitution to individuals brutalized and harmed as youths in its institutions, while simultaneously, on the other side, carry out the execution of one such individual." Supporters of Floridians for Alternatives to Capital Punishment gathered close to 5,000 signed petitions and presented them to the governor on execution day, pleading for clemency in Victor's case. During September 2025, his lawyers submitted a detailed 36-page motion containing fresh proof of the abuse endured at Okeechobee. They insisted this material belonged before the jury as strong mitigating factors capable of shifting the verdict's result. Yet the Florida Supreme Court turned down the request by a 5-1 margin, concluding the matter remained procedurally foreclosed. The opinion noted, the purported mistreatment took place almost half a century earlier, well over a decade prior to the trial itself. Still, Jones never brought it forward at trial or during any earlier collateral attacks. His counsel then sought review from the United States Supreme Court. Mere hours before the appointed time, that court dismissed the petition silently. No 11th hour reprieve arrived, no stay, no compassion. Victor Tony Jones was set to be executed on September 30, 2025. September 30, 2025 marked Victor Tony Jones's last day alive. He rose at 4:30 in the morning and passed much of the time in conversation with his spiritual counselor. No additional guests came. His chosen final meal consisted of fried chicken, collard greens, and sweetened iced tea, a modest southern dish evoking memories of his roots. He consumed it in silence, fully aware his life would end soon. At 6 p.m. sharp, the observation room curtain parted. Spectators assembled, including Irene Fisher, daughter of victims Jacob and Matilda Nestor. Having lost her parents in her 30s, now in her 60s, she had waited decades to witness justice for their murderer. Journalists, correctional staff, and Department of Corrections personnel were also in attendance. Beyond the prison walls, roughly 60 demonstrators assembled in an adjacent open area opposite death row. They conducted a collective prayer vigil, for Victor, for the Nasters, and for the abolition of capital punishment. At 6 p.m., they lined up and struck a large bell in rotation with a mallet, chanting, "Not in our name," a statement rejecting any endorsement of the killing done on their behalf as Floridians. Reverend Philip Guido from Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Parish organized the gathering. Closed by a lone dissenter, Bill Campbell broadcast lively tunes, voicing support for carrying out the sentence. Within the death chamber, Victor Tony Jones lay restrained on the gurney, arms outstretched, with intravenous catheters in place. At 6 p.m., the warden inquired whether he wished to make any concluding statement. Victor shifted his head and replied, "No, sir." Those became the final words he uttered. By 6:02 p.m., only 2 minutes after the viewing began, the lethal agents entered his bloodstream. Florida employed its standard 3-drug sequence for capital punishments. If this story moved you, hit like, share your thoughts and tell us where you are watching from below, and subscribe to Bruised Voice for more raw, unfiltered stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. The initial injection was a powerful sedative crafted to plunge Victor into total unconsciousness. Next came a paralytic substance engineered to paralyze his respiratory muscles and end breathing. Finally, potassium chloride flowed in, a compound meant to arrest cardiac activity permanently. A few minutes into the infusion, the warden grasped Victor's shoulders, shook him firmly, and repeatedly shouted his name. There was silence in return. Victor's skin turned ashen as he lay utterly motionless upon the gurney. Respiration steadily weakened until it ceased completely. Cardiac rhythm followed, fading to nothing. By 6:13 p.m., only 11 minutes after commencement, Victor Tony Jones was formally pronounced dead. State officials declared the execution had unfolded smoothly with no irregularities. The viewing curtain was lowered. The procedure was finished. Victor Tony Jones, who had spent 35 years confined on death row, who the state of Florida had formally recognized as having endured documented childhood abuse, who had taken the lives of 2 elderly individuals during his second day of employment, had died at age 64. Afterward, Irene Fisher, daughter of Jacob and Matilda Nestor, spoke with journalists. "I wish my parents had been granted such a gentle passing. Just shut your eyes and drift away." She added, "Part of me is relieved this is finally behind us. Another part grieves that one more life had to be ended." Irene asserted that justice had ultimately prevailed. Though she had found it in her heart to forgive Victor, she considered the execution unavoidable. Her parents had been viciously stabbed to death inside the very business they owned, killed by a person they had hired and placed their confidence in. After 35 long years, accountability had arrived. Outside the prison walls, protesters voiced strong opposition. They maintained that executing Victor, a man who suffered documented torture and mistreatment as a child under state supervision, was morally unacceptable. Critics highlighted what they saw as stark hypocrisy. The state had paid Victor compensation for the abuse he suffered in its care, yet executed him just 53 days later. They called the sequence indefensible on ethical grounds. Irene Fisher and the victims' relatives held a contrasting stance. They insisted that no matter how brutal Victor's childhood had been, it could never justify or mitigate the cold-blooded murders of Jacob and Matilda Nestor. They believed Victor had consciously chosen, on December 19, 1990, to end 2 innocent lives. In their view, that choice warranted the death penalty. Victor Tony Jones's story forces society to confront painful, complex questions without simple resolutions. Is a person who experienced extreme childhood trauma and abuse fully culpable for violent acts committed later in life? Does severe early harm excuse criminal behavior, or does it only help explain it? Can a government that has officially conceded it abused a child during his youth retain the moral right to execute that same individual decades later? These dilemmas continue to challenge legal experts, ethicists, and philosophers alike. One fact stands beyond dispute: Jacob and Matilda Nestor should never have died that way. They were hardworking, honorable people who built a modest business through years of effort, raised children, and enriched their community. They gave Victor employment, showed him trust, and offered him a new beginning, only to be repaid with fatal violence on his second workday. Records indicate that at least 9 former residents of the Dozier School or Okeechobee institutions have been put to death by Florida. Countless others received death sentences. The trauma inflicted within those facilities did not vanish upon release. It lingered, influencing decisions, shaping destinies, and steering many toward prison sentences, death row, or the execution table. Victor Tony Jones himself remained imprisoned on death row for a full 35 years. During that extended period, his defense counsel repeatedly sought leniency, emphasizing the severe abuse he had suffered as a boy and arguing that execution would constitute grave injustice. The judiciary consistently denied relief. Courts observed that Victor had many opportunities over the decades to properly raise claims tied to his childhood mistreatment but had not done so successfully. They deemed the pertinent evidence procedurally defaulted. The legal system concluded that justice required Victor's execution for the crimes he committed. History alone will determine whether that conclusion was correct. What is certain is that on September 30, 2025, at precisely 6:13 p.m., Victor Tony Jones's life came to an end. After waiting 35 years, the family of Jacob and Matilda Nestor finally witnessed the man responsible for their loved one's murders being held fully accountable. Renee Fisher expressed a sense of calm. Demonstrators gathered beyond the prison walls voiced their deep grief. Meanwhile, Florida, the same state that harmed Victor during his youth and later paid him restitution as a grown man, carried out his execution merely 53 days after placing funds in his inmate account. The chapter involving Victor Tony Jones has concluded. He endured brutal treatment as a boy inside a government-operated reform facility. He later turned into a killer, fatally stabbing 2 senior citizens early in a new job. He endured 35 years awaiting capital punishment. Authorities acknowledged him as someone wronged by the system and provided compensation shortly before his lethal injection. His final meal included fried chicken, collard greens, plus sweet tea. His parting statement, "No, sir." Then, one Monday night in September 2025, a syringe delivered the drugs and his heartbeat ceased. In whatever form it takes, justice had been delivered. Victor Tony Jones marked the 13th execution in Florida during 2025, establishing a new high for the modern period. That year, Florida topped the country in capital punishments, fueling ongoing arguments about whether putting abuse survivors to death represents true justice or simply revenge. If this story moved you, hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Bruised Voice for more raw, unfiltered stories like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.